Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Katryna and as Jeff said, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Miko. And very briefly, Miko enables, it's a dual-sided personal data and consent platform, enables individuals to bring their identity and their attributes to share or exchange in a consented way. And if time permits, I'll share a few things that we're doing to specifically start to show the value within the GDPR context. What I wanted to do for the next 15 minutes or so is step you through just 12 guidelines that have come from the ICO that are quite practical, almost a checklist. And the interesting thing is we're getting so close to GDPR now. When these were published a few months ago, there was a bit of a runway for organizations to start some of these activities. But we're getting very, very close now to a deadline. And so what I've done is I've taken these 12 steps and I've married them together with what we call the concept of innovating beyond the compliance. Because if this is going to be the new normal, what's really important is what's beyond this. And one of the things that we're seeing every day when we're speaking with enterprise and government is great people focused on GDPR compliance, doing the data mapping, making sure that they can report back to the board on the issues of governance, which is critical. But we're equally seeing in other parts of the business either digital transformation or customer-centric solutions. And the problem is those two parts of the business or government are actually not talking to each other. And by not talking to each other, one of the things that we're seeing is going to collide come May next year, middle of next year, is there's going to be this tension between the digital transformation of an organization or a government service to its citizens and the ability, because of what may have been implemented on the compliance side, for that to actually happen. And so what I would like to do is just step you through some considerations that are really about what the new would be. So let's fast forward a year, 18 months, 2 years, GDPR, e-privacy, PSD2, any of these regulatory changes are the new normal. What's really important is what's going to make the digital transformation, the customer, citizen, patient engagement models of the future work. So I said very briefly, Miko's working on, if you like, we simply say the API of me. So one of the things we're focused on is how do you enable a citizen, a customer, a patient, a student to literally plug in to an enterprise stack in some way. And so the things that I want to explore right now is how some of these compliance requirements can be reimagined or more inclusive of the me. And the me is, think in your organizational context, whether or not you're customer focused, if you're a retailer, if there's a customer, if you're a health service, if there's a patient at the end of that, if you are obviously a government department, the rights and the roles of a citizen. And so each of the blue are the recommendations or the guidelines of the ICO, and I believe these slides will be available afterwards. And then the red is what is the lens that you could take to that compliance journey to be thinking more broadly around creating value beyond the compliance. So this is the 12-step cheat sheet, which, as I said, will be available. And this was published, I'm thinking maybe 9 months ago, a little around that time, with the view that GDPR was like a year off, and these are some of the things that would be advisable for organizations and enterprise to start thinking about. So the first one is focusing on awareness. So decision makers and key people in your organization are aware. How many people have sponsorship in your organization from a member of the board, or your GDPR is being represented at the most senior part of your organization? Okay, 20% of the room. So one of the things that I would say is that is going to be a significant challenge, because the funding requirements and the potential compliance issues and the responsibility for senior people is significant. And one of the things that we find every day is that the requirements are trapped in a part of the system and they're not getting up to a senior enough level for people to get the sponsorship, either from a budget point of view or for them to understand what those implications are longer term. So the first thing that needs to be done, obviously, is to start thinking cross-portfolio in an organisation. This is really critical. This is not just about legal and compliance. This is also around where there are digital services. This is around the innovation agenda. And most importantly, this is about the impact that it's going to have to the end customer, the end person that's being served. And so one of the things that we would recommend is that in doing this impact assessment, we start to look at how you balance the needs of both of those stakeholders. The next requirement is to start mapping the value chain, or actually start mapping the data that's held. And we would reframe this to start thinking about what the value chain looks like. And that's kind of a different perspective to looking at where the data may be residing in terms of a data lake or a CRM system or an ERP system. But start looking at how all those inputs are used and the value that they currently create. Just leave a second for everyone to get settled. I think we started maybe a little earlier.
They probably just announced it that the sessions were starting in May.
Yeah, they did. They didn't come and tell us, I'm afraid. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I think they were running a little bit behind this morning, and so just for those of you that have just joined, my name's Katryna. What I'm doing is just taking a document that was published by the ICO about 6 to 9 months ago with 12 key steps in preparation for GDPR, but balancing it against some of the things that you can be doing around your digital innovation agenda, and looking at what the new market may look like beyond the compliance. So the interesting thing about the value chain is we find often with organizations is that we see this idea of the customer or the human is the new platform. If we were actually going to move to hyper-personalized services where consent is explicit, unambiguous, informed, then we're going to have to start bringing that end customer, that end patient, that end citizen into the value chain. And so if right now there is data mapping, which is required as a regulatory part of the regulatory preparation process, we would absolutely encourage you to start looking at, well, what is the value chain that sits directly around the end customer, and how do you start thinking about those things together? Reviewing current privacy notices. Obviously there will be lots of internal documentation that will need to be reviewed, updated. Last night when we were getting off the ferry, or when we were getting onto the ferry to come from Estonia, I think I might have been walking with Mark Lazar, and he looked at all the signs around the CCTVs and said, you know, in a few months' time, or come May, these signs will not be adequate because they don't seek to give you enough information around why you're being filmed and how that information, how that video footage might be used. And so many of you will have heard of the movement of privacy by design. If you're going to rewrite those policies, this is a huge opportunity to actually differentiate. This is as much a marketing and customer positioning opportunity as it is a compliance requirement. And so starting to rethink about how you may differentiate your organization, your government department, specifically around the settings being designed for privacy, and then creating a unique value proposition for why somebody may opt in to expand that. Individual rights. Obviously you need to check the procedures to ensure they cover the rights that are required from the regulatory point of view. And this is also a great opportunity, particularly if you've been able to form a cross-portfolio approach within your organization to different stakeholders, legal and compliance, obviously, marketing, customer, digital, identity, access management. This is one of the critical areas we're seeing where SIAM or customer identity access management actually comes into play. And that's mainly because a lot of this could be unlocked if there is the right consent around the individual customer's identity and how that moves across the value chain. So this is an opportunity to start looking at how you actually give customers much more agency, and you marry together the individual rights with the value proposition of the organisation. Scalability, the subject access requests. It's really interesting the number of enterprises we talk to where they actually say, look, they're going to handle this manually because they don't anticipate people are going to be asking for access or their data. I presented this at a workshop in Germany a few months ago with a lawyer who said that he was already seeing ads being placed through the EU for customers to start keeping a lookout for where there may be a breach, so that they could start to form, not necessarily a class action, but for lawyers to represent those customers to start mandating for those rights. So many organisations say, we're going to handle it manually. We don't think there's going to be an influx. I've also heard from the EU that come January next year, there will start to be a wide-scale advertising campaign, buses, trams, airports, television, letting citizens understand under this new regime what their data rights are. So if you haven't worked out what that service is going to look like, and if it's not scalable, this is going to be a real bottleneck for organisations. And then if the compliance is not within the prescribed period of time, then that's going to have some downstream significant customer issues. Obviously, there is going to be a legal basis for processing data. One of the things we would encourage you, if from a portfolio point of view, there is also in other parts of the organisation identity and digital transformation or innovation programs in place. Start thinking about what's the minimal viable collection for the maximum viable access and reframe that as a value proposition. The consent work that we're doing every day suggests that if something is going to be really unambiguous and informed, there has to be value that is easily to articulate and compelling for a customer to agree. I don't have I know we started with a few technical problems, so I'm going to wrap up as quickly as possible. We've only got a few minutes left. But as I said, these slides will be available, and if you want to speak, if you have any questions on this after, I'm very happy to do that. Consent. There'll be lots of opportunity over the next day, tomorrow, to explore issues specifically that do with consent. The key thing from a customer point of view is context. What are you asking me? Why are you asking me this? What do you need? What are you going to do with the data? And so this is not a cookie, click, agree, disagree. This is going to require actually some context to be put around what is being asked for. And our experience is, and has validated this, the more meaningful that is, the more likely consent will be given. Children. It was interesting with Stuart's presentation just now, that clip from Silicon Valley, if you saw it. There are so many services right now that are not doing age verification and that don't have the right mechanisms in place to know whether somebody is 10 years of age, 13 years of age, or 99 years of age. So one of the things that we need to start thinking about for a digital generation post this regulatory change is this is the new normal. Having things in place that will be designed for a generation that will never see their data in any other form than digital. Their birth records, their citizenship records, their education records. So whilst that may seem like that's a long way off, starting to think about what that digital transformation roadmap looks like, where we'll soon have a generation of customers that will never receive anything in any analog way, will never receive something through the post, and will not really know how to fill out a form. Now that may still be, 5 years plus away, but we need to be thinking from the regulatory point of view how we start to design for a very different generation. Data breaches, obviously there is the legal requirement in terms of the way the breaches must be held. This is another opportunity to use the transparency or the culture of your organization to come out in front as this being a values-driven initiative. So of course there is the legal requirement, but is this also an opportunity? I spoke at a conference in Denmark a month or so ago, Money 2020, and there was someone from a large insurance company that said they had actually created a customer charter that specifically outlined the way that they would act and work with customers in that regard. Data protection by design, data protection impacts. Your DPO is your best, your new designer. If you can start to be looking at how the DPO can work together with you around dialing up the trust and transparency, and bring that DPO into any of the design initiatives and from that portfolio point of view, that's really going to be very critical. And the making sure right now that the organisation understands the DPO's role. This is not a tick the box exercise. This is not, okay, we're going to get some forms in place, we're going to get our lawyers, we're going to tick the box, and we're smooth sailing. This is going to have a much more significant impact to organisations in the way e-commerce, face-to-face, online businesses serve their customers. And so this is also a great opportunity for that role in the organisation to come front and centre as an advocate for the customer, and where we're seeing organisations embrace that. Last but not least, international. I can't believe the number of times I've spoken in the US in the last 6 months where audiences say, why are you even talking to us about this? It's a European thing. It's not our problem. It's a waste of time at a conference to be talking about this. You ask them, are they a global bank? Are they an insurance company? Are they an airline? Yes. Do you have customers in Europe? Yes. This applies to you. Really? Are you sure? Yes, this applies to you. And so starting to think from day one of the big problems is many of these organizations have a central core technology system, and the idea that they are going to have to be able to not just have nuanced cultural campaigns in different parts of the world, but comply from a different regulatory point of view. Thinking about how you serve that international group of constituents is really important. Good news in 30 seconds, we have been trialling these initiatives from the customer point of view in telecommunications, banking, finance, health and travel for the last year. And every single time you bring the constituent in, the participation increases. The more trust and transparency, the more likely customers are actually to share data. Last thought. We're seeing this evidenced over the talks yesterday, the things you'll see today. The health of a future-proof society is going to be the willingness to share the data it collects about its people, about its customers, about its citizens, with its customers and citizens for mutual value. And if I could leave you with one last thought, it's how you get this portfolio approach to what you're doing with GDPR. And instead of this being a compliance responsibility, turn this into a huge customer opportunity. Thank you.